The termination email arrived at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday. Daniel Mercer read it 3 times, each pass slower than the last, the blue glow of his phone screen cutting through the darkness of his bedroom while his wife slept beside him. His hands weren't shaking. That surprised him. After 14 years of building something from nothing, 14 years of 80-hour weeks, missed anniversaries, holidays spent on conference calls, 2 herniated discs from the travel, he expected his hands to shake. They didn't. They were completely, unnervingly still. The email was 4 sentences long, effective immediately, position eliminated. Please surrender your access badge and company devices to HR by Friday EOD. Severance details to follow. It was signed not by Marcus Webb, the CEO who had hired Daniel personally and called him the backbone of this company at last year's all-hands meeting. It was signed by someone named Bryce Calloway, a name Daniel had learned to recognize over the past 8 months the way you learn to recognize a persistent rattle in your car engine. You know something is wrong. You just keep hopping, it'll go away on its own. Bryce Calloway was 26 years old. He had a business degree from a school whose endowment happened to share a name with his grandmother. He had been installed as Chief Strategy Officer, a title that hadn't existed 6 months prior because his uncle was Gerald Webb, the company's largest shareholder and the CEO's older brother. Bryce had the lean, manicured confidence of someone who had never once applied for a job, never sat in a waiting room with sweating palms, never needed anything from anyone. He wore fitted Italian suits to meetings that didn't require suits. He spoke in business school aphorisms delivered with the gravity of original thought. And from the moment he arrived at Calloway Webb Financial Services, he had been circling Daniel Mercer the way a man circles something he wants to own but can't figure out how to take. It started with questions, innocent ones at first. Walk me through your client management system, Daniel. How does the relationship with Northgate Capital work exactly? Who are your main contacts at Meridian Partners? Daniel had answered openly, the way you do when you assume good faith, when you believe the institution you've given your best years to would not weaponize your cooperation against you. He was the senior vice president of strategic partnerships. He had personally cultivated a portfolio of relationships worth $380 million in annual revenue. He knew where every body was buried, every handshake deal was made, every client's particular sensitivities and preferences. He was, in the most literal sense, irreplaceable. Or so he thought. 72 hours before his annual bonus was scheduled to deposit, $160,000 already earned, already owed, representing 18 months of a particularly brutal performance cycle, Daniel Mercer was fired. He didn't cry that night. Didn't rage, didn't call his lawyer at midnight, though he had one on speed dial for exactly this kind of emergency. He lay in the dark for 3 hours and did something that, in retrospect, may have been the most dangerous thing Calloway Webb Financial Services had ever allowed to happen. He thought. Daniel was not, by nature, a vengeful man. His wife, Sandra, who would wake in the morning to find him already dressed and seated at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, would tell you that. His college roommate, now a partner at a Whiteshoe law firm in Manhattan, would tell you that too. The people who knew Daniel Mercer understood that he was methodical, that he was patient, and that he had a particular gift, the same gift that had made him extraordinary at his job, for understanding how systems worked. Who needed what leverage existed where, which threads, when pulled, unraveled everything. He spent those 3 dark hours mapping the system. By the time Sandra appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6 a.m., reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, he had filled 4 pages of the legal pad. She looked at him for a long moment, then at the pages, then back at him. How bad, she asked. For them, he said, very. The first call he made was to Raymond Cross. Raymond was a labor and employment attorney in the city, someone Daniel had met at a client dinner 3 years prior and maintained a careful friendship with ever since, not because he anticipated needing him, but because Daniel Mercer maintained careful relationships with everyone. It was, literally, his job. Raymond picked up on the second ring despite the early hour, listened without interruption, and when Daniel finished, made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a wince. 72 hours, Raymond said. 72 hours, Daniel confirmed. And your bonus structure, it's in your contract. Section 7, Paragraph C. Performance bonuses are earned upon completion of the fiscal performance period, defined as December 31st, and are payable within 90 days thereof. The fiscal year ended December 31st. I was terminated March 28th. The bonus period ended. The bonus was earned. They just didn't pay it before they fired me. There was a pause. Daniel could hear Raymond writing. They're going to argue the termination voids the payout clause. They can argue whatever they want, Daniel said. The contract language doesn't support it. No, Raymond agreed. It really doesn't. Daniel, what exactly do you know about the Hartwell acquisition? And here was the thing, here was the thread. For the past 11 months, Callaway Webb had been in the final stages of acquiring Hartwell Capital Management, a mid-sized asset management firm based in Chicago. The deal was valued at $450 million and represented the company's most significant strategic expansion in its 30-year history. It was, in the language of the press releases Daniel had helped draft, transformational. Gerald Webb had staked considerable personal capital, financial and reputational, on the deal closing. The board had approved it. The shareholders had been briefed. 3 separate financial news outlets had run pieces on what the acquisition would mean for the company's growth trajectory. What virtually no one outside of Daniel's immediate orbit knew was this. The Hartwell acquisition had not been secured by investment bankers or by Bryce Callaway's sweeping strategic vision or by the CEO's handshake relationships with Hartwell's board. It had been secured by Daniel Mercer, who had spent 4 years cultivating a genuine friendship with Hartwell's chief operating officer, a woman named Patricia Soules, over shared meals at industry conferences, handwritten notes when her father passed, and a referral that had saved her company $2 million in a contract dispute. Patricia trusted Daniel, not Callaway Webb the institution, not Gerald Webb the shareholder, not Bryce Callaway the nephew, Daniel. Specifically and personally. And Daniel had not yet told Patricia that he'd been fired. He called her on a Tuesday morning, 11 days after his termination. He had spent those 11 days being careful, letting Raymond send the initial demand letter, citing wrongful termination, breach of contract, and the unpaid $160,000 bonus, and watching Callaway Webb's legal team respond with the predictable dismissiveness of an institution that didn't yet understand what it had done. He had organized his documentation. He had backed up emails. He had taken careful stock of what he knew and what he could prove and what, most critically, was about to become someone else's problem. Patricia answered on the first ring. Daniel, I've been meaning to call you. Something weird is happening with the due diligence communications. I've been getting emails from someone named Bryce about the integration timeline and I didn't know who. Patricia, he said, I need to tell you something. He told her all of it. The 11:47 p.m. email, the 4 sentences, the 72 hours, the $160,000, Bryce Callaway, his uncle, the circling questions, the mapping of Daniel's relationships and accounts in the months before the termination. He was not dramatic about it. He recited the facts the way he had recited facts his entire career, with precision and without embellishment. When he finished, Patricia was quiet for a moment. They fired you, she said, to avoid paying your bonus. That's what my attorney believes. And this Bryce, he's been in your meetings, he knows your contacts, he knows our deal. He knows the surface, Daniel said. He was in the meetings, he heard the conversations, but Patricia, you know, he doesn't know what he doesn't know. Another silence. What does he not know? She asked. He doesn't know, Daniel said carefully, that our LOI has a relationship continuity clause. Section 12, it was something your general counsel insisted on after the Prentice merger, the one where the key relationship manager left mid-close and everything fell apart. You required that any acquisition agreement with Callaway Webb would include a provision ensuring continuity of the primary relationship contacts. Patricia, I'm the named contact in Section 12. By name, not by title. The silence this time was very different in quality. Daniel, she said slowly. I know. That clause gives us the right to exit the LOI if the named contact leaves or is removed from the account, yes. Oh my God. I thought you should know, Daniel said. Because I imagine someone is going to figure this out eventually, and I'd rather you hear it from me directly than from a panicked phone call from someone at Callaway Webb who's just discovered it. The panicked phone call came 18 days later. It came not to Daniel but to Raymond from Callaway Webb's general counsel, a measured woman named Elaine Forsyth who had the careful, controlled voice of someone trying to convey urgency without revealing the full dimensions of the catastrophe. She called Raymond at 4 p.m. on a Wednesday and spoke for approximately 7 minutes. Raymond took notes, thanked her pleasantly, and called Daniel immediately after. They know about the clause, Raymond said. Yes. Hartwell's board has been informed. They've formally notified Callaway Webb that they're exercising their right to review the LOI based on the departure of the named relationship contact. Okay. Daniel, Raymond's voice shifted. Hartwell has brought in outside counsel. They're not just reviewing the LOI, they're reviewing the entire deal. Patricia Soules has apparently indicated to Hartwell's board that she has concerns about the institutional culture at Callaway Webb based on, and I'm reading from the note here, recent treatment of key personnel. Daniel said nothing. The deal is essentially frozen, Raymond continued. Callaway Webb's stock dropped 4.2% this morning when word got out that the acquisition timeline was under review. Gerald Webb personally called Hartwell's CEO last night. It did not go well. How do you know that? Because Elaine Forsyth told me, because she is, I think, a decent person who has found herself trying to put out a fire she didn't start, and because she wants to talk settlement. The settlement conversation took 6 weeks. In that time, the Hartwell deal entered a state of suspended animation that cost Callaway Webb an estimated $12 million in extended due diligence fees, legal costs, and the quiet exodus of 2 institutional investors who had positioned themselves around the acquisition and grew nervous when it stalled. The company's stock, which had been riding high on acquisition optimism, shed 9% of its value over the period. Gerald Webb, by multiple accounts, was not sleeping. Bryce Callaway had been quietly removed from the Hartwell integration team and repositioned to a vaguely defined internal role that seemed to involve attending meetings without speaking. Daniel, during this period, did the following. He took his daughter to every one of her Saturday soccer games for the first time in 3 years. He repainted the kitchen with Sandra, a project they'd been postponing since 2019. He slept 8 hours a night. He read 4 books. He had 2 productive conversations with a recruiter at a competing firm who had reached out, somewhat breathlessly, within 2 weeks of his departure, becoming known in industry circles. Because in an industry built on relationships, Daniel Mercer's relationships were extraordinarily well known. He felt, for the first time in longer than he could specifically remember, like himself. The final settlement, which Raymond negotiated over 3 increasingly tense sessions with Elaine Forsyth and an outside mediator, included the following components. The $160,000 bonus, paid in full, with interest calculated from the date it should have been disbursed. An additional payment that Raymond described to Daniel as substantial and which Daniel has declined to specify publicly, representing compensation for wrongful termination, breach of contract, and what the agreement termed reputational and professional damages. A non-disparagement clause that ran in both directions. Callaway Webb could not badmouth Daniel, and Daniel technically could not badmouth them, though the facts of the situation were already well documented in industry circles and required no amplification from Daniel to be understood. And a formal letter of reference signed by Marcus Webb himself, describing Daniel's tenure in terms that were, given the circumstances, almost surreally glowing. The Hartwell deal did eventually close, approximately 4 months behind its original schedule, at a renegotiated price of $418 million, $32 million below the original valuation, a discount that Hartwell's board justified in part by the uncertainty created during the review period. Deal's lead credit went to a newly hired senior vice president of strategic partnerships, a woman brought in from a competitor at considerable expense, specifically to fill the relationship gap that Daniel's departure had revealed. Industry observers noted that she was, by all accounts, excellent, and that she had been Daniel's recommendation to Raymond during the settlement negotiations, a gesture he'd included not as a bargaining chip, but because he believed it was the right outcome for the clients. This detail circulated quietly through the industry. It added somehow to the story. What happened to Bryce Callaway is less dramatic than people tend to assume when they hear this story. He was not fired. He was not publicly disgraced. He remained at Callaway Webb in a diminished but technically active capacity, his title unchanged, his actual influence reduced to approximately nothing. The real punishment for Bryce was subtler and arguably more fitting. He became the story. In an industry that runs on reputation and relationship, he became the cautionary tale told at dinners, the name attached to a catastrophic strategic miscalculation, the face of a decision that had cost his family's company $32 million in deal value, $12 million in carrying costs, and a decline in market capitalization that exceeded $200 million at its nadir. Every room he walked into in that industry would contain at least one person who knew the story. He would spend the rest of his career managing that. Gerald Webb, for his part, made a rare public statement at Callaway Webb's next shareholder meeting acknowledging that, personnel decisions made in Q1 of this year did not reflect our values as an institution and contributed to unnecessary disruption in our strategic operations. It was, as public statements of accountability go, masterfully indirect. It said everything and named no one, but everyone in that room knew exactly what it meant. Marcus Webb called Daniel 3 months after the settlement. Daniel took the call. They spoke for about 20 minutes. Marcus said things that Daniel felt were sincere, though insufficient, though perhaps as sufficient as they could be given the circumstances. Daniel thanked him and meant it. He bore Marcus no particular ill will. The world is full of people who look away from things they should see, who allow momentum to carry decisions they should interrupt. It's a human failing, not a malicious one. Daniel understood the difference. The call ended. Daniel looked out the window of his new office, a different company, a larger title. Compensation package that reflected what the market had apparently decided he was worth now that the Callaway Webb situation had illuminated his value in neon, and thought about the strange alchemy of the whole thing, how they had tried to diminish him and had instead defined him, how the mechanism they used to deprive him of $160,000 had ended up costing them hundreds of millions, how their contempt had been their undoing, not his. He keeps the legal pad in his desk drawer, the 4 pages from that first night filled with his careful handwriting mapping the system. He's not sure why he keeps it. Sandra has suggested it's a reminder that stillness can be the most powerful response to someone else's cruelty, that the mind in the dark, working quietly and without performance, is more dangerous than any amount of noise. She might be right, Sandra usually is. Daniel Mercer started his new job on a Monday in September, 4 months and 12 days after the termination email arrived at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday. His new office had a window that faced the park. His new title was Executive Vice President. His new compensation package was, coincidentally, almost exactly what he had asked for and not received at Callaway Webb 2 years earlier, in a review meeting where Bryce Callaway had sat in the corner taking notes and said, just as Daniel was about to press his case, I think we should table the compensation conversation for now and circle back. Daniel had let it go that day, had let it be tabled, had told himself to be patient, to trust the institution, to believe that what he built would eventually be recognized and properly valued. He would not make that mistake again. Not because he had become harder, he didn't think he had, but because the experience had clarified something important. Institutions don't protect people. Contracts protect people. Documentation protects people. Relationships, real ones, built over years of genuine care and reciprocity, protect people. Bryce Callaway had walked into Daniel's professional life and seen a set of resources to be plundered. What he hadn't seen, what none of them had really seen, was the architecture underneath. The years of trust, the carefully maintained connections, the specific and technical protections woven into agreements by people who had learned, through previous betrayals, to build in safeguards. You only see the architecture when someone tries to demolish the building and the building declines to fall. The last detail worth knowing is this. Patricia Soules sent Daniel a bottle of wine when she heard about his new position. Attached to it was a handwritten note, actual handwriting on actual paper, the kind of communication Daniel had always preferred and always practiced. It said, the right people end up in the right places, takes longer than it should sometimes, congratulations, don't let the next place take you for granted. P. Daniel put the note in the desk drawer with the legal pad. He poured the wine for Sandra that evening, on the back porch in the last of the September light. They didn't talk about Callaway Webb. They talked about their daughter's upcoming school play and the kitchen they'd repainted, and a trip to Portugal they'd been promising themselves for 6 years that they were finally, actually, definitely going to take. The evening was ordinary in every way that matters. Daniel Mercer had earned it.